Dangerously Close. My guest today is Julie Marron. Julie is the director of American Bolshevik. Why not just kill them? Coexistence with the coyote. Through interviews with biologists, activists, a hunter, and a New York Times best-selling historian, American Bolshevik details the century-long attempt to eradicate this intelligent predator, an attempt which inadvertently drove the expansion of the coyotes' territory into nearly every rural, suburban, and urban area across the lower 48. As the coyotes' territory has expanded into new regions like coastal New England, populations of humans in these areas are learning how to coexist with these animals and to appreciate the role they play in supporting a diverse and balanced ecosystem. Julie Marron is an award-winning director who explores issues around science, media, and law. Her latest film, American Bolshevik, will be released on Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV in January of 2023. What's up, Julie?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, I had some questions just that I thought that I was going to jump out the gate with, but there was one that I actually want to it's the first thing that struck me when you sent me your film and everything is the title of the film, American Bolshevik. And I am familiar with the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution. What does that mean in your film title?
That's a great question, and I know that I love the title, and I actually got it from a piece in Dan Flores' book. And as you mentioned, he's an historian who wrote the best-selling, the New York Times best-selling novel American Bolshevik. He wrote Coyote America, and in that he details kind of this long history of the relationship of humans with coyotes, prior to the European settlers, and then once the European settlers arrived, sort of how they changed the landscape and how that changed, that humans' relationship with wild animals and in particular coyotes changed. And, in that book, he details some of this history, which beginning with Mark Twain and his best-selling novel called Roughing It, which I know most people are familiar with. And in that novel, in that sort of, it's a comedic novel. He really sort of describes his travels across the American Great Plains and his, encountering the coyote. And he really describes it as this, this sort of skulking vermin, and really uses these very negative descriptions of the animal, which are funny, but they're very negative descriptions of the coyote. And Dan mentions in his book and in the interview that we do with him in the film that from that point on, sort of the new Americans, the European settlers that have come to what became the United States, really developed this perception of the coyote based on initially on Mark Twain's description. And then later on, over the course of many decades, as we tried to eradicate these animals, there was actually a PR campaign that was waged against all predators, and in particular the coyote, because they proved to be very resilient. And Dan traces this evolution to an article that appeared in Scientific American in 1920, where they described the coyote as being the original Bolshevik of North America. So obviously that was a very loaded term at the time, right? And I think it's still a pretty loaded term, but it really, I think it very succinctly describes, the relationship that we've had with the coyote over more than a century. And, we can talk a little bit about it going forward, but, we've really made every attempt imaginable to eradicate this animal, and, right down to PR campaigns over many decades. So that's the genesis of that title.
Okay. Well, wow. That is a deep historical root for the title. I was
Right.
I'm not even going to pretend that I know the meaning of very many Russian words or even the word Bolshevik very accurately. but I do believe that I recall the word Bolshevik, like in a literal translation, means something like the many, meaning kind of, and I guess in the Russian Revolution they meant that as the people, we the many people, as opposed to the very small ruling class. So I don't know, maybe that's not a bad application for the coyotes, because as much as people try to kill them off, there are many coyotes.
No, I actually like what you've done there, because you've taken a word that in America at least has most often had very negative connotations, right? The Bolsheviks, the Bolshevik Revolution, we've kind of had a negative perception of Bolsheviks, and it was, in the press, the word was certainly used in a very negative way, but sort of like owning that and evolving that meaning back to, what it meant to the Russians. So I really like that interpretation, actually.
Yeah. And I don't want to go crazy and just keep going down this rabbit hole, and I won't go much further, but I guess too, I don't know a ton about, studying like coyote behavior as a species, but they do seem like, they're pack animals, they're cooperative animals. And so in that way too, that's kind of a socialist, communist type of animal society. Okay, I'll stop there. I know I'm getting ridiculous now. But what I do
I like it.
But I do want to your point that you brought up with, and that's there's this negativity associated, and it goes back to the time of Mark Twain is saying negative things about coyotes, and I'm sure since far way before that. And I just want to go ahead and say that I like coyotes a lot. I think they're a cool animal. I think that the mythologies that people have created about them are cool. But obviously, coyotes are a controversial animal, like we were saying. And there are plenty of people that outright hate coyotes. And what causes all of this animosity from humans? It seems like a lot.
No, it really does. It's amazing to me, too, because, I also love the coyote. I think it's a really amazing, adaptable, just really interesting animal. And, I was kind of shocked, actually, to realize how much animosity there is for this animal. So I grew up primarily on the East Coast, New England area. And during my entire childhood, I never saw a coyote. The only time I had an interaction with coyote was, Wile E. Coyote on Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
And I had no reason to dislike them. I think any encounter with wild animals is pretty fascinating. I never had any reason to dislike the coyote. But over the past several decades, we've started to encounter coyotes in every part of the United States. So in all cities, they've moved east, they've moved into the southeast, into the north, they've kind of gone up through Canada and come down to New England. And so now more people are having interactions with coyotes. And so, of course, we're experiencing, more issues in areas where we haven't had issues in the past. They've sort of been in the news more and more because of this expansion of their territory. So from my perspective, it was really, sort of understanding that they're kind of moving into these territories and people are having to coexist with this animal that they've never encountered before in their lives. And so that interaction has been a little bit different, I think, from the interactions with coyotes in other parts of the country where, they've existed for millennia and people are kind of used to coexisting with them. Of course, they already have, in many cases, kind of a negative perception of them based on, as I mentioned, and I won't go into too much detail here, but that long history and the PR campaign against them. So it's kind of interesting because I think this expansion sort of gives us an opportunity to reassess our relationship with the coyote and to really understand their behavior a little bit better. But, as I mentioned, expanding into these new areas where people haven't experienced that type of interaction before, like here in New England, it's just given rise to a whole host of new studies that have been initiated to understand them. And we've really had to kind of grapple with, okay, we've never had to deal with, any kind of significant predator here in New England ever since the extirpation of the wolf, 150 years ago. So how do we coexist with this animal, and what does it mean to coexist with this animal? I think that that's really been at the forefront of people's minds, and it's been in the news. Certainly there have been some negative interactions, but we really need to take a step back and kind of take a look at, what does this mean to us to have this new animal in our midst, and what are the benefits that it brings? How do we need to change our behavior to coexist with it? So from my perspective, I think it gives us a lot of opportunities. Especially here in New England, I want to kind of talk about that. But your question was really, why do people hate this animal so much, right? Why is there so much animosity? And I kind of want to take a step back. When I was researching this film, initially I started looking at, coyotes in New England. We started kind of interviewing a couple of people had interactions with coyotes, some negative. We interviewed a woman, who is a biologist who had been studying coyotes in this area. And that was all very interesting. But I really wanted to kind of take a step back and look at this 30,000 foot view. Like what, how does this fit into the larger context of our relationship with coyotes over, the past century or so?
Yeah.
And as I kind of alluded to before, we went through this really long period of time where, especially, once European settlers arrived onto this continent and started settling what became the United States, we actually had this amazing sort of, what was called in some cases, the American Serengeti, right? We had this Great Plains area that it was home to 30 million bison, elk, pronghorn, bears, wolves, mountain lions, like this just plethora of these really amazing animals that really rivaled Africa in a lot of respects. And, over a couple 100 years, 150 years, and then, we really, we had this concerted effort where, hunters were killing these animals, ranchers started to settle and kill these animals. And there were these federal programs that really backed this program of eradicating all of these animals from the Great Plains.
Yeah.
And, of course, predators were a big deal. If you're ranching, the existence of predators, mountain lions, bears, wolves, that's a threat to your livelihood. And so we actually invested a lot of resources into eradicating all of these animals. And, we're pretty successfully, right? I mean, we've pretty much eliminated.
I find that that's one of the things that I find so infuriating is especially government funded programs. And at the beginning of your film, there's a lot going on with, just human beings eradicating animals just relentlessly, with no thought as to the repercussions in the future. And but this, it's to this day, this is a problem. Like we've got like people being funded by the government to take automatic weapons and kill wolves in certain areas. And but I don't want to get on my soapbox about that, because I'm tempted to do that sometimes. But I wanted to you said something that really, really resonated with me. It's because it's my own personal experience with coyotes, specifically as far as where you see them, where you used to see them. And I used to spend a lot of time in Tucson, Arizona. That's where I was born. And I like to go mountain biking. So I'd see coyotes all the time because I was out where there weren't many people. But nowadays, I live in metropolitan Nashville, and I see coyotes walking down my street. They're in my front yard. We actually got on, like you were saying, the news. We got on the national news because they found a coyote in the bathroom of the Music City Center. And that's like, That's our huge convention center. It's right in the middle of downtown, and it's a long way from any real wilderness. And, somebody came into work one day, opened up the bathroom, and there was a coyote hanging out, on the sink. That means that coyote was just walking around downtown Nashville, which is, has gotten to be quite a large city these days. Going into that though, one question I have is, why does it seem like coyotes are popping up everywhere? And you had said, there's an expansion, but also where I think a lot of people are not familiar with this. What regions were coyotes originally, that was their original territory before the expansion, and then what's causing the expansion, and why are they in cities now?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And one of the things that Dan Flores says actually in the film and in his book is coyotes have always lived among humans. In some of the more ancient cities in North America, there's evidence that coyotes benefit from some of the we create spaces where rats and mice, for instance, like to exist, and so coyotes, that's one of their key prey. So they've always really liked to live among people, but we haven't really experienced that so much until I think really the last few decades. And initially, I won't say in sort of recent modern history, coyotes, obviously, they populate the Great Plains, the southwestern part of the United States. But as we began to eradicate all of the animals that live there, particularly the predators, a lot of kind of the larger predators were relatively easy for us to completely eradicate from a particular area. When we started to sort of turn our sights on the coyote, that's when we sort of started to experience a little bit more difficulty. And one of the things I really love about the coyote is that it actually exhibits, it's a fission fusion animal. And there are not too many fission fusion animals in the world. Humans are actually one of those types of animals.
Can you repeat that term?
Yeah, it's called fission fusion. So what that means is that, so the coyote, the wolf, for instance, it's a fusion animal. It's pack oriented. It only exists within the confines of a pack. That's how it survives.
Okay.
And because it is a pack oriented animal, it's actually a lot easier. You kill one, you can kill all of them. So it's a little bit easier to eradicate. The coyote, on the other hand, is a fission fusion animal. And what that means is that they can either exist in kind of these loose packs, or they can exist as individuals. And so what happened when we started to really, step up the persecution of the coyote and try to eradicate them from their natural, the territory they had existed in, was that, one of the things that happened is that some of these animals sort of started to expand their territory. They could kind of go off as individuals or as pairs. It was less easy to eradicate them because of this fission fusion characteristic. Much like humans, very adaptable, can kind of exist anywhere. So that to me is really interesting. And I don't know if you talked about this. I know you had discussed an author who used a lot of sort of Native American coyote mythology in his work.
The trickster.
Yes. In Native Americans, really revered the coyote and sort of saw the coyote as an avatar for humans and kind of taught lessons as sort of this avatar for humans, which I also found really fascinating. So one of the reasons that the coyote has been able to expand its territory is because of that fission fusion. They can sort of take up, leave, start to populate new areas. It's easier for them to do that because they are these, fission fusion animals. So that's one of the reasons that their territory has expanded. There are some biological adaptations that the coyote exhibits that make it very difficult to eradicate. And that's another reason that, they've not only sort of survived where they are, but actually thrived despite this persecution and this attempt to eradicate them. And there are a number of things that actually contribute to that. First of all, if you kill coyotes, they, exhibit a biological response where, they'll have larger litters. And they can pretty easily.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So their litter size will increase to kind of compensate for that. So there are a whole host of things that, that really make the coyote extremely flexible and adaptable to these conditions. So, and actually, we're kind of getting into the whole discussion of, why not just kill? Why doesn't it work to just kill coyotes? Why can't you just shoot them and get rid of all your, human wildlife issues that way, right?
Yeah.
And I know that, it's been a big discussion, especially in some of these new areas where, and here in New England. The reason I actually got involved in this whole story to begin with was because we were experiencing, people were seeing coyotes all over Rhode Island. We weren't used to it. It, understandably frightened people. Some people were losing their, their cats, their dogs. And so there was kind of this big uproar, we need to, kill them. We shouldn't be, coyotes shouldn't exist here. And one of the people that I interviewed for the film was this biologist, as I mentioned, and she had spent several years studying the coyotes, sort of putting collars on them, tracking where they lived. And, she was able to confirm from, some of the studies that had been done previously that if you kill coyotes, if they exist in packs, they'll have an alpha male and female, and usually like, a couple other younger siblings from the previous year in that pack. And their territory is as big as they need that territory to be in order for them to, to have enough food to survive. So the alpha male and female are the only breeders in that territory, and they also defend the territory, right? So you don't get other coyotes coming in. That alpha male and female and the pups live in that territory. They keep it relatively stable. They're very good neighbors in terms of, reducing some of the other animals that we view as pests, right? They balance the ecosystem within that area. And if you actually come in and try to, shoot those coyotes, if you kill one of the alphas or both of the alphas, what happens is some of the, we call them transient coyotes, or this is what the biologist calls them for this study here in Rhode Island. The coyotes that don't live in that territory are then feel free because it's no longer being defended by the alpha male and female. You actually get more coyotes coming into that territory to sort of duke it out and try to, own that territory. And in addition to that, whereas before only the alpha male and female were breeders, if you shoot them out, new coyotes will come in and breed with the yearling pups. And so you'll end up with more litters of puppies, greater numbers. And so you're actually just, you think you're actually reducing the numbers, and all you're doing is sort of exacerbating the issue.
So, so when these people come in, they kill the alpha animals, and the direct result of that is to create larger litters of puppies. I mean, that's like a direct one-to-one result.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so not only would the single female actually, have larger litters to sort of make up for that, but you may have more than one female then breeding, especially if you're shooting out the alphas that defend the territory. And so, the numbers just keep, essentially the numbers just, keep increasing until you're at the same point, or maybe have more than you did before. And so you don't want to destabilize that area. The important thing that I think we've learned is that we need to understand how we can adjust our behavior to coexist with coyotes versus trying to kill them and eradicate them. That has not worked for over a century.
I think that's the philosophy that more people should try to have too, because nature wants to be in balance already. And it's
absolutely
humans are the element that is out of balance. So we are the ones that create imbalance. We are the one, and there's probably no better, there's plenty of great examples, but you just gave such an incredibly good example of humans causing imbalance by disrupting the natural order of the coyote population and then increasing the coyote population. And which also is what an incredible evolutionary trait to be, to their benefit. I did have one question too that this is kind of a leap, but it's kind of goes back to just a few things you said just a little bit ago. And one in the very beginning, you were talking about in New England that wolves were extirpated. There are no wolves there now, but we've been talking about the biological attributes of coyotes, the evolutionary benefits they have, how they're able to continue. But also there is now wolf DNA in the coyotes, right?
Yeah, you bring up a really, really interesting, and this is super fascinating. No, coyotes have always been able to breed with dogs and with wolves. And, there were certainly some instances in the Great Plains and the southwestern area where as wolves were being extirpated from those areas, some of them started breeding with coyotes or with domesticated dogs because it was the only options. But it was not quite, it wasn't really a common occurrence. As we tried to eradicate coyotes from the Great Plains, they started to expand their territories, as I mentioned, to the east, but also kind of up north through Canada and then to the east that way. And what ended up happening is as they made their way through Canada and then sort of came down into New England, they had, many of them had bred with wolves in Canada. And so the coyotes that made it to New England, many of them ended up with having, anywhere between 8 to 30% wolf DNA in them, and a tiny bit of dog here and there as well. And so what ended up happening is the coyotes, many of them that settled the New England region ended up being a slightly larger animal. So, the coyotes in the Great Plains Southwest, 25 to 35, 40 pounds, sometimes a little bit larger than that.
Yeah.
But the ones that ended up coming into New England, had kind of brought that wolf DNA with them, ended up, the coyotes that we have here are anywhere between 35. We've had coyotes weighing up to 60, 62 pounds in this area, which is really a phenomenal evolution of the animal.
This literally just happened, I think a week ago. A friend of mine sent me a photograph of a coyote. It's he lives in the same neighborhood as me, and he's like, "Look at this coyote." And I was immediately I was like, "That's a wolf." I mean, that's because like I told you earlier, early on in my life, like in Tucson, and the coyotes of the Southwest, like you're saying, they're very small. They're small. They look like small, fluffy dogs, and they're not intimidating, even in groups. I've never felt in any kind of danger whatsoever around coyotes, especially the ones that I'm familiar with the most, because they are small. It seems like it would take a lot of them to take down a grown adult, but also they don't seem interested in doing that either. But yeah, just to your point, my friend just, he took a photograph with his phone, sent it to me. This was a week ago. And my very first, the first thing I said though, I was like, that has to be a wolf. There's no way that's a coyote, but we don't have wolves walking around here. I mean, so it does have to be a coyote. And it's certainly, to what you're saying, it must have just, it's the wolf DNA must have, has made this coyote twice the size of any coyote I typically have seen.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think people routinely sort of, and this is totally understandable. It happens a lot in this area. People sort of routinely overestimate how large, an unusual predator is. And a lot of coyotes will have these kind of thick coats, particularly in certain times of the year, that really make them look a lot bigger than they are.
Yeah.
But that said, we still here in New England, they're still not. They still just don't pose as much of a threat as wolves would, right? Wolves can get up to 100, 125 pounds. I mean, they're really large. And if you see a picture of a coyote next to a wolf, you're like, wow, that's really a big
Oh, and I agree entirely that coyote had a winter coat, and it was also just that I was just so surprised to see an animal that large walking on his sidewalk.
Yep.
But
right.
There's a little pack of coyotes over here that I live by a creek, and they love to hang out down there, and they come in my front yard, and they're all very small dogs. They all they all seem like they're all between 30 and 40 pounds is my guesstimate on all of them.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I'm always interested to hear these stories. This is great. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're in the perfect area for coyotes.
But it is crazy. I mean, if you see a coyote that weighs 50 pounds, that's a big looking coyote.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. And it's interesting. The ones that have gotten up to, like I said, I think it was either Massachusetts or maybe New Hampshire. There was one that weighed, 60, 62 pounds. And that's a very large coyote. That's unusual. We don't typically get them that large, but, obviously it does happen. The interesting thing about them too is that, here in New England, we extirpated the wolf a very long time ago. We're totally unaccustomed to coexisting with any kind of, significant predator in this area. And, we do have a lot of deer in this area. So as these sort of some people are calling them Eastern coyote. I'm sure you've heard the term coy wolf, which I know some people are, don't like to use that term because they think it's a little bit alarmist and sort of creates additional fear around these animals.
I've never heard the term. It's coy wolf.
Yeah.
Like coy, like shy.
No, like coyote wolf.
Oh, okay. I completely misunderstood you. I was like, oh, like a shy wolf. I was like, they're all kind of shy.
Right. So, I mean, it's interesting because we've had some folks in this area who've done some of these studies on the DNA, which is, how we have evidence of this. But, we've been calling it the Eastern coyote, and it's fascinating because this is an evolution of the species that's happened only over the past few decades, right? So it's really amazing to kind of be able to see that. And they start to exhibit, some of these larger animals are more effective at occasionally taking deer. It's not, that's not typically what their diet is, but, they certainly can. And those that live in the family group and the pack, some of them have become more proficient at taking down some of these larger animals like deer. We have a lot of deer in this area.
Yeah.
So it's just really fascinating to kind of see that evolution.
I'd like to say one thing that's okay. I probably very, very unlikely, but like you said, it's biologically possible. And it could be something, there could have been a Great Dane or some other kind of large dog that mated with a coyote. And then that litter of coyotes is going to be that's going to be a bunch of big coyotes, and they're going to carry that gene down. So I know that's unlikely, but it's not out of the question.
No, I mean, it's not out of the question. It's, it happens certainly. And we've seen it here in New England, obviously there's, here and there, we do get domesticated dog DNA in some of these coyote lines. So absolutely. I think it's absolutely possible. It's really, really interesting. But I do, as I'm sort of talking about this, I know that it's one of these things that alarms people because here in New England, haven't had wolves for a very long time. we're starting to see some more predators like bears and bobcats, and there have been some reports of the occasional mountain lion, which is very, very elusive. But this is a kind of a development that's frightening to a lot of people, and understandably so. We're not used to, we let our dogs and cats out. We're not really used to seeing this predator. Some people, seeing the predator are really fascinated by it, kind of want to draw it into their orbit. They'll leave food out, either deliberately or inadvertently, and kind of, make these animals habituated to humans. And that, in turn causes more and more issues, because we end up having these human-wildlife conflicts.
Yeah.
Once the animal becomes habituated to human beings, right?
Would you say that maybe like in the type of area you're describing, like a city in New England, when you say a human wildlife conflict, do you mean that specifically, which I feel like it's the most kind of like salacious thing that people like to bring up, is that coyotes might eat your pet?
Right. Yeah. So, right. Yeah. And I think thanks for kind of keeping me honest about that term. So what is human wildlife conflict? That can cover a number of different things. And certainly a coyote can eat your pet. And, but the term covers everything from, I saw a coyote walking down the street. It scared me, so I called the police. That's
okay.
Not really human wildlife conflict, but, people just seeing a coyote going about its business normally and not posing any kind of threat. Sometimes people perceive that as conflict, even if it's not. So, part of what I think is really important is we need to understand what is normal coyote behavior. What should we expect versus what is not normal coyote behavior. So, coming onto your back porch and eating the dog food, not normal coyote behavior. We really want to discourage that, because those coyotes are going to get habituated to people.
Yeah.
And, people are going to lose their pets, and that's a bad thing. Right.
I mean, you could do the exact same thing with grizzly bears. You could, that's right. That's once again, that is humans being out of balance with nature. It's not nature. These coyotes don't want to come on your back porch, but if you're going to leave food out there for them, it's like people that feed squirrels.
Right. Right. Well, this turns out to be kind of one of the, the big, one of the things that precipitates what ends up being, actual human wildlife conflict. And actually, I sort of start the movie, one of the opening, I think the second scene in the film is we get, I'm talking to this woman who had a dog that was taken by a coyote, right? I mean, that's a really traumatic thing. And I have a lot of empathy for that. I lost a cat to a wild animal. It's a devastating thing to have happen to you. And it happens where you have coyotes. Sometimes that does happen. If you have cats outside, if you have small dogs that are off leash, that kind of thing it's definitely a risk. And so one of the things that we have to do as humans is we have to understand that coyotes can pose a threat to our small animals. And we have to make sure that we're walking them on leashes, that your backyard is kind of fenced and secure, that you're not leaving food out at night. There are things that we can do as humans to minimize that conflict and to minimize the, potential of these animals getting habituated to human beings, right?
Is there any more? I mean, I guess for the sake of just keeping it more simple, let's talk about just New England and the cities in New England and the way people feel in that area. Are there any other conflicts really besides like what we said? Like, obviously people would be concerned that a coyote might eat their pet if they have a small pet that's outside, or that if you saw a coyote, it might frighten you. And then, of course, you have farmers whose their concern is that a coyote might affect their livestock, which I feel like that's probably, when it comes on down to it, where the money's at. When you have government getting involved and paying people to go out with with automatic rifles and shoot coyotes. That's having to do with livestock ranchers. I'm going to guess.
Right.
But are there any other forms of human wildlife conflict that you're aware of besides kind of those obvious?
I think it's primarily individuals, concerned for their pets or, their small children or their own safety. And then as you brought up a really good example, farmers and ranchers. And, typically the farms in New England are on a smaller scale than what we see, out in the western part of the United States. And, because of that, there are things that maybe are more practical for farmers here to do in terms of fencing and barns and things of that nature. But what the study, there have been a couple of studies that were done, and we find that when farmers who have livestock, just sort of toss carcasses in a pile not too far from where their livestock live, that's an invitation that supports whole families of coyotes. It makes the territories smaller because territory typically expands so that the pack has enough area and has enough food availability. So if you have these sort of big piles of dead livestock, you may have several packs come, sort of adjacent to each other that can feed off of that. So it's really important that farmers and ranchers in this area, take care of their livestock and don't, make sure they're protected, use guardian animals, don't just carelessly discard carcasses. There are things that can be done.
And if I may, to any New England farmers or ranchers, if you're listening, something that I learned recently from a previous guest who specializes in non-lethal predatory animal deterrence. There's a very interesting thing that animals, especially bears, specifically bears, but also coyotes, they don't like podcasts. So if you set up, I swear I'm not making it up. It's true. It's one of the deterrents he uses in addition to like scents and other things that work really well on animals. He'll set up speakers and play
You're talking about Petros.
Yeah, I'm talking about Petros Chrysophis, my friend that deters predatory animals in a non-lethal fashion. He uses podcasts because it's not music, because music doesn't sound like people talking. Podcasts, because it is just the sound of human voices, is a very deterring sound. So I just want to put that out there in case any ranchers, anyone who owns livestock in New England is looking for a way to deter, just throw on your favorite podcast, or may I suggest throw on this podcast. I'd be honored to help keep your livestock safe.
I love it. It's such a unique thing to say, but it's actually a great idea because it sounds like there are people around, and generally speaking, coyotes, they don't want, they want to avoid people unless they've been habituated. So it's actually a brilliant idea. I have to say, and it's one I have never heard before. I've heard of flags, putting flags out, fencing, guardian livestock.
One of the things that I thought was so fascinating, learning about what are the most effective deterrents. And, because people, of course, they want to think of the most expensive way to do something because they think the most expensive way to do something is going to be the best. And as we know, that's obvious. That's patently untrue all the time in any kind of subject. But in this one as well, they had this, ranchers coming up with this thing where it's a drone. The drone costs about $10,000, and I think it's run. I don't even know how the drone is run, if it has an AI or what. And there's a paintball gun attached to the drone. So it's getting so complicated and so ridiculous. And then this drone patrols the perimeter of your ranch, and then if it spots a coyote, it shoots a paintball at it, and that is supposed to. So, anyways, this is. God forbid you're starting with $10,000 for just the drone. We're not even talking about the software, the paintballs, the paintball gun. The fact that this thing almost certainly doesn't work because this kind of, this sounds like one of those like bloated military budget projects where they make a fighter jet that can't take off. But then they're like, well, what you could also do, you can take a bunch of clothing and saturate it with cigarette smoke, leave that around the perimeter and put up a podcast, and that'll keep the animals out.
That's actually, that reminds me of sort of a funny story I heard, and I really wanted to include this in the film, but they absolutely, I couldn't get them on camera. But so Newport, Rhode Island is, there's a very, as you probably know, very wealthy section of Newport, Rhode Island. The Gilded Age mansions, line the coast. There's a very exclusive golf course there and country club. And there were people, these members of the club, golfers, they started seeing coyotes, on the golf course. And they really wanted to get rid of them. So I think there was sort of a little bit of push-pull here. There were some people who were sort of feeding, kind of closet feeders, maybe tossing a sandwich or two to the coyotes and sort of encouraging them to lose their fear of humans. And then there were people who were really angry that the coyotes were, kind of crossing their golf course. And so a couple of members took some, paintball guns and a couple of golf carts and started kind of driving around trying to shoot them with paintballs to kind of scare them away, which I would have loved to have gotten on camera. They, couldn't get them to agree to this. But the great irony here is that the biologist that was doing the study ended up finding out where the den was for this pack of coyotes. And it turns out it was like right underneath, I think, like an outdoor balcony for the country club.
Oh my God.
So it was just, it was, like I said, it would have been a great scene for the film, but I couldn't get them to agree to talk about that on camera.
If there's one thing I love, it is stories of obscenely rich people being morons in a humiliating way. It just sounded so so funny, and I can totally see them doing that. It's just well, actually, this was what I did want to get to. So, I mean, we've talked about what the conflict is, why it's there. It's and some of them are very legitimate conflicts, and some less than others, of course. But this is one of the things that you're trying to get at, and trying to figure out, and that's coexistence. So, I'm wondering what are some of the methods for creating coexistence with coyotes, and especially in these communities where coyotes seem to be a newer presence, where people are not familiar with them. They maybe get a little bit more spooked because they're not, they didn't grow up with this animal.
Right. Yeah, I think, the number one thing is really educating people about the relatively simple steps that we can take to keep ourselves and our pets safe, and also to keep coyotes safe. So just basic education on how coyotes operate, the benefits that they bring to our local environments, whether that's suburban, urban. There's a lot of coyotes living in cities, and they actually are pretty they're pretty beneficial to cities. They keep rodent populations down.
Yeah.
So it just basic education about how they operate, things that we absolutely should never do, like feeding them intentionally, sort of luring coyotes in so that they become habituated to humans, leaving cat and dog food or trash out and unprotected. There are basic things that we can do, that are relatively easy, that discourage coyotes from becoming habituated. Making sure that we have our pets on a leash, making sure that they're not running free, especially, during the spring when, coyote dens have pups in them and coyotes are going to try to defend their dens. So there are relatively easy things like that we need to do. And then if you do see a coyote becoming a little bit too familiar, hazing. being very loud, or trying to deliberately scare them away. Don't let them, get habituated to humans. They're very intelligent and adaptable. And as long as kind of we do our part, for the most part, we can minimize this kind of conflict. So I think that it's often not taking, it doesn't require that much on our part to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to coexist. And then, of course, we already talked about from a farming perspective that, there are other things that we can do as well to keep our livestock safe.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is really, and it seems like this seems almost ubiquitous to just almost every subject, but it seems like for promoting coexistence, it comes down to education, to educating people on the facts and educating people on what they should do, the behavior, what the reality of it is. It seems like that's kind of like square one, where you want to start, is getting people educated and aware of what the situation really is.
Yeah, the education, and then just having the willingness to do it, right? I sort of letting go of that hubris that I think we have that, causes so many issues in the world, and just saying, we're willing to coexist to make sure that we have a balanced ecosystem, and that, we can appreciate the wildlife in our area. I think that's also a big part of it as well, right?
Yeah. And I guess, we could draw a perfect line here. Speaking of education, American Bolshevik. It's a documentary film. It's an educational film. I highly suggest everyone, when it's out, get out there and check it out. But I wanted to know about, for your own personal experience, when you were filming American Bolshevik, did you have any experiences that really stood out as the best parts of the filmmaking process for you?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. Well, I'd like to say, like, when I'm making a film, I get really, the people that are in my films, they're in the film because they're interesting, or they have a unique perspective. There's something important to say. And I always appreciate the folks that go out of their way. They commit themselves to being in a film. They've got to, I've got to sit down, talk to them. They kind of like expose themselves. Like they talk to me in a very honest way. And I just have everybody that I have in my films that I interview. I end up spending much more time with them than they spend with me, because, once I interview them, however many times that is, I go back and I spend hours and hours and hours with them. And I really feel like I get to know them very, very well. So to me, just kind of, getting to know these people and really appreciating the unique perspective that they bring, that's just something that I love, from every single one of my films. And I always appreciate that people are willing to kind of, talk to me and talk about, Diana, who's Prince is a philanthropist, lives in Newport. She lost 2 of her dogs to coyote predation. And that's really sad and, gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
But she was willing to kind of get on camera, talk about that. And then she's also very, an intelligent and sort of creative person. And she spent a lot of time, trying to figure out, well, what can we do? And ultimately, she ended up funding the study that in Rhode Island on coyotes. And so, I ended up talking to the biologist that structured that study, as well as the sharpshooter that was hired by towns to kill coyotes that were deemed to be troublesome. So I just really appreciate hearing their stories. I think that that's really interesting to me. So that part of it, I think that's the part that I really, really love. But that's really the big part of it for me. And then just really digging deep into a topic, I think is fun, and kind of being able to take a step back and look at this issue within the context, within a much larger context, and having folks like Dan Flores, who's the author, who, kind of wrote this epic story of the coyote in America, and to kind of be able to, place these these, smaller, more local stories, it was in the context of this, very broad context of the history of coyote in America. To me, that's kind of the part that I love most about it.
Yeah, it does seem like being a filmmaker or making a documentary has and I'm sure this is similar to also even being maybe even a novelist and to some extent, but it's the making all these connections, meeting these people, hearing their stories, and through all of that, it all comes together and it builds this final product that seems like it must be just a exceptionally satisfying way to end with, a work of art or a creation of however you want to describe it, because there's so many people along the way that help build I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, but you know what I mean? The final project.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. And then, if this can help other people kind of understand more about coyotes, can help them kind of appreciate what coyotes, the benefit that they bring to them, and just appreciate the beauty, and, support some of the work I interviewed Camilla Fox, who founded Project Coyote, and they work not just with coyotes, but predators in general, and try to, help educate people about the benefits of predators, and, sort of really change hearts and minds about that. And, really touch on, it's a tough world for predators, and we don't make it easy. And, going back to the whole idea of the American Bolshevik, we have such a negative perception of them that, we have allowed some really horrendous things to go on. They're hunted indiscriminately in many parts of the country in ways that, I think would be extremely shocking and just horrifying to most people if they kind of knew what was going on. So, if we can sort of highlight that work, I think that really makes me happy too.
And not to ask a question to try and bring any negativity out, but I am curious. This is still about the filmmaking, or just making the film, and I just wanted to know, what was the hardest part, about making this film? What?
Oh God, yeah, that's easy. I will tell you.
Okay. Yeah.
The hardest part. It was so emotionally devastating. I interviewed Camilla Fox of Project Coyote, and some of the work that they do around, drawing, shining a light on how we treat predators, and what happens in killing contests. And there are just some horrific things that go on in the world. And in order to sort of illustrate some of the points that she was making, I had to go onto YouTube and watch dozens and dozens of video. I mean, you wouldn't believe the people who just sort of kill coyotes for sport and for fun. It's horrifying. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these things. And I had to kind of go through and watch these things and select a couple of, clips to illustrate it. But it was just devastating. It was so hard to do. That's an easy.
I wasn't expecting you to say that, but man, that sounds awful. And I've said this, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times. There's probably nothing that infuriates me more really than trophy hunting and killing for the thrill of the kill. I don't know. I find it really, really just barbaric and not, and just, flat out uncool. I think it's
definitely uncool.
It's uncool, but it's also, I think it's also sick. I think it's uncool, and I also think it's like an illness that people have to bring pain and death is for pleasure. It's bizarre to me.
It's very strange to me. It's very strange to me as well. And I understand people who hunt for food and, are kind of ethical hunters. I know plenty of people who do that. It's not something that I would choose to do, but I understand it.
Yeah.
And, I respect that. But I just saw too many instances of, the torturing coyotes, like just doing things that would be illegal if you did it to almost any other animal. If you did it to a dog, it would certainly send you to prison. But for a coyote, it's just totally acceptable from a legal perspective. And that's really disturbing.
Yes, of course. And yeah, I don't know. I will say this is that I'm not going to end this on a horrible note.
Yeah,
because I've got really good news, and that's we're getting dangerously close to the lightning round.
Oh boy.
So I was a little worried because I had written down in my notes, I was like, I got to ask, what's the hardest thing about making this film? I was worried you were going to say something about animal cruelty, and you did. And so,
I'm so sorry, but that's what it was.
But we're going to play a little game right now, and we're going to cleanse our palates.
All right. Excellent. A palate cleanser. I like that.
Okay. I did not write this lightning round. This lightning round was written by co-producer Colleen. She actually just dropped this off in the office while I was talking to you about 20 minutes ago. I haven't read this. I have no idea what I'm about to read you, but I will tell you the rules. The lightning round. I ask you questions super fast. You don't have time to think. Gut reaction only. These come in many forms. I'm going to find out what you got today. Ooh, you got one of the hardest ones. It's a this or that. So I'm sure you're familiar with the game. Would you rather?
Yep.
This is like that. So you might not be happy with your answer, but one's got to go and one's got to stay. This is called Lightning Round, this or that, the documentary edition. So it is personalized to you for being a documentary filmmaker. All right, let's hit it. I have a feeling you're going to win. First one. Oh, these are two films. Super Size Me or March of the Penguins?
Oh, that's so hard, but I'm going to take March of the Penguins. But that's hard.
That is hard. They're both great. Ooh, okay, here we go. This is kind of crazy. Win an Oscar or viral clip on TikTok?
Oh, that's just a no-brainer. Yeah.
Viral clip. No, I'm just kidding. Oscar. I don't know. What is it? What did you say? Because you never answered.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I would definitely say Oscar, even though it's so funny because I just do these because I love doing them and I love, talking to people about various topics. And so it never really enters my mind even when I'm doing it. But yeah, I'm totally Oscar. Yeah.
Okay. Make a documentary in a language you don't speak or make a documentary about something you don't know about. Well, that seems easy too.
Oh gosh. So every time I make a documentary, it's something I don't know about.
That's what I was gonna say.
So I already did that. I do. I learned so much when I'm making the documentary. So I think it would be fascinating to do a documentary in a language you don't speak. I'm gonna say that.
You'd have to get some Rosetta Stone and some Duolingo and really really hit the grindstone on that one.
Right.
People in that country will be watching it going, what is she talking
about?
What
the heck?
Okay. Make a documentary about tarantulas or make a documentary about MRSA virus, aka flesh-eating bacteria.
Oh God, they're both so fascinating. I mean, when you're a kid, tarantulas are just the most fascinating thing. It's kind of scary, fascinating. MRSA also very scary, fascinating. I'm going to say tarantulas though. Okay.
I'm sorry, Julie, though. I will not be watching your film on tarantulas. I'm a little freaked out by I'm a lot freaked out by tarantulas. I'm trying to act.
Well, you're going to be pretty freaked out about MRSA too.
But it doesn't crawl towards me I don't know.
You feel like you could avoid it and I get it. Tarantulas, they were so fascinating. I remember when we were kids. Yeah.
Ooh, this one's a wild one. All right. You've got all the film equipment you need, but you have a budget of $1,000, or you can shoot video. You can only shoot video with a old flip phone, but you have an unlimited budget. You could spend unlimited money on it, but you can only shoot it with a flip phone.
I would take unlimited flip phone just because I would just go to so many places. I think that would be, yeah.
Yeah,
yep, that's my answer.
Just for the experience. You could just turn it into a. Oh, yeah. I'm making a documentary of where I see the entire world.
Right, exactly. I do every bucket list thing in every part of the world imaginable. Right.
Co-producer Colleen did not let you off easy though. Here, last one, and I don't know. I'm very curious to hear how you answer this. But we've got two of the greatest voices in documentary voiceover, and you're gonna have to choose one. Sir David Attenborough or Morgan Freeman.
Oh, that's just cruel, Colleen. That is just cruel.
She always sneaks one in. Always one.
I'm going to say Morgan Freeman, though.
Really? Yeah. Oh, yep. Man, he's great. He's great. Oh,
my son would insist. My son would be like, "Yep, no, absolutely, yeah, no."
I think I might have to go with Sir David Attenborough. Because I feel like the British accent makes it sound.
Yeah.
And he's done.
I get it.
I mean, I love him. I love them both. I don't know. You know what? It's not about me. It's about you. You chose Morgan. You chose Morgan Freeman. Okay, I have one last question for you. It's the most important question of the day. Your new film, American Bolshevik. Where and when can people check it out? In addition to that, anything else you want them to link to check out what's going on with this film and everything, all the good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So we have a webpage for the film. It's AmericanBolshevik.com. I'll be adding stuff to that. It's actually being released probably at the end of January. I don't have a firm date yet, but it'll be on Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV. And we've got a couple of, we've got a TikTok account, American Bolshevik. It's at American Bolshevik on TikTok. We're just kind of uploading, some clips of Coyotes. We'll start to include some clips from the film. And then on Twitter, it's at American Bolshev, ending on the V, because of Twitter rules. So you can certainly check us out there as well. And we'll be, as we start to advertise, we'll get up on Instagram and Facebook. So that's about it.
Okay. And everyone that follows me, I will do my absolute best to link to as many of these things as I can on my socials. So if that makes it any easier on you. Julie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for teaching me so much about coyotes.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Absolutely.